Hi everyone, my name's Matt, and today we're going to be putting together and testing out a $500 gaming PC using all new parts. This system is going to be rocking a 6-core CPU, powerful dedicated graphics card, and uses high quality parts that should last for years to come. At this budget, you do have to make some compromises, but I think overall for $500, this PC is offering a great value. This might not be quite up to par performance-wise with a console of the same price like the PS5 or Xbox Series X, but because this is a PC, you have the ability to do so much more than just game. With that being said, gaming is the main focus of this system, with it being able to play pretty much anything at 1080p and even a lot of games at 1440p. And if you're looking for a budget 1440p monitor to game on, I would recommend checking out the sponsor of today's video, KTC, and their H32S17. KTC is kind of the king of budget gaming monitors right now, and this H32 is a great example of that. This monitor is currently on sale for about $180 on Newegg and is offering a ton of features for that price. It's a 32-inch monitor rocking a curved 1440p HVA panel and supports both FreeSync Premium and G-Sync. The high 165Hz refresh rate and 1 millisecond moving pixel response time make this a great monitor for gaming, and the rich colors, deep blacks, and high color gamut mean this is also going to be a great monitor for content consumption, like watching movies and anime. I like having a big curved monitor like this as it makes exploration and single player games super immersive, but again, that high refresh rate and low response time also make it great for competitive gaming. It's VESA mount compatible but does include a very nice looking and sturdy stand. You get both HDMI and DisplayPort inputs and can easily tune the monitor to your exact liking using the 5-way OSD joystick. This monitor also comes in a 27-inch variant, and if 1440p isn't your jam, KTC has a variety of high refresh rate displays in 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, meaning they have monitors for basically anyone's budget and preferences. To check out the KTC H32S17 or any of KTC's monitors, make sure to head to the link in the description. If you haven't upgraded your monitor in a while, now may be a good time as gaming monitors have gotten very affordable. Thanks again to KTC for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to the build. So now let's talk about each of the parts and how they go together. For the CPU, at this price point, there are two main options you can choose from. The first is the Intel Core i3-12100F for around $75, and the second is the AMD Ryzen 5 5500 for around $80. The i3 is actually the more powerful between the two for gaming, but with only 4 cores and 8 threads, I don't think it's a great option right now in 2025. For that reason, I decided to go with the Ryzen 5 5500. The CPU is a few years old at this point, but it offers 6 cores, 12 threads, and turbo speeds of up to 4.2 GHz. This chip is great for budget gaming and even some workstation applications like 1080p video editing and music production. Also, because the CPU is on the AM4 platform, it means you have the option to upgrade to something like a Ryzen 7 5700X3D in the future. Another great thing about this chip is the fact it comes with a decent stock cooler inside of the box. This is the Wraith Stealth Cooler that's basically just a hunk of aluminum with a fan attached. With that being said, it gets the job done cooling your CPU and doesn't look half bad either in my opinion. For the motherboard, I went with the Asus Prime B450M-A2. Now, I went for this board because for the $80 price tag, it offers a decent amount of features like 4 DIMM slots, pretty good PCI expansion, an NVMe M.2 slot, and adequate backpanel I/O. Also, this board does ship with the BIOS necessary for running 5000 series CPUs, so you don't have to worry about that. So the first thing to do is install the CPU by opening up the retention arm, lining up and inserting the CPU, and finally resecuring that retention arm. Then, after removing the 4 screws and 2 plastic mounting pieces, I applied a pea-sized amount of thermal paste to the CPU IHS because I've used the CPU and cooler before, but if yours is new, you can skip this step as your cooler should have come with thermal paste pre-applied. Once lowered down, it's just a matter of tightening the screws in a cross pattern, plugging in the fan connector, and neatening up the cable for a cleaner look. For RAM, I went with what is the budget meta right now, which is a 16GB kit with 2x8GB sticks of DDR4 memory running at 3200MHz CL16. I would recommend just grabbing the cheapest kit that matches that spec criteria, and at the time of purchasing, this blue silicon power set was the cheapest kit at around $25. 16GB is adequate for budget gaming, especially if you just play esports titles, but like I said before, our motherboard has 4 slots, so upgrading to 32GB in the future should be as easy as popping in 2 more 8GB sticks. With that being said, for about $20 more, you can pick up a 32GB kit out of the gate if you so choose. These 2 RAM sticks are going to be installed in slots 2 and 4 on our motherboard, and after opening the clips are just lined up, lowered down, and pressed into place until the clip snaps shut, and this is just repeated for the second stick of RAM. For storage, I went with a tried and true budget classic in the form of this 512GB Silicon Power A60, which comes in at $28. 500GB of SSD storage is the absolute minimum that I would recommend in 2025, as it gives you enough room for your OS, applications, and a couple of your most played games. The 1TB model is only about $20 more and might be worth spending the extra money out of the gate, but for most people 512GB should be perfectly usable, especially as a starting point, as you can always upgrade in the future. At the NVMe slot on our board, we have to install the standoff that came from the motherboard box, then the SSD can be inserted at an angle, hinged down, and then secured in place with the M.2 screw. With that done, we can move the motherboard aside and grab out our case, which in this instance is the Cooler Master Q300L. At $36, it's the cheapest case I could find that wasn't this one. It's actually a pretty interesting concept, as it's designed to work either in the normal orientation or laying on its back like this. It has these giant magnetic dust filters, and the side I/O can be moved around. Now, the big downside to me is that the side panel is acrylic, which scratches much easier than tempered glass. After getting the panels off and the screw bag out, I could insert the I/O shield, install the standoffs which aren't pre-installed for some reason, and then I can insert the motherboard and secure it with a bunch of screws. Make sure to consult the manual, as these aren't the typical screws you'd use for installing a motherboard. Next, I got out the power supply, which is the MSI Mag A550BN. This is a 550 watt, 80 plus bronze rated unit that will supply plenty of clean power for the entire build. It is non-modular, which isn't ideal, but is 100% to be expected at this price point. Before installing this, I plugged in all the small front panel cables except for the USB 3 connector. Then I installed the power supply by first attaching it to this bracket, which is then screwed into the case. You may want to consider installing this with the fan facing up, as the gap on the bottom of this case is pretty small. Then I could route the 8-pin CPU power cable and the 24-pin motherboard power cable to the back, and then through the holes that would bring the connectors closest to the headers. Then I plugged in the 8-pin cable up here, the 24-pin cable over here, the USB 3 cable down here, and the back case fan up here. With that done, there's only one more component left to install, which is the graphics card. There's about $190 left in the budget, and for that amount you have 2 main options, either the AMD RX 6600 or the Intel Arc A750. Both are solid options, but I decided to go with the Intel card as I just did a build with the 6600. Something to note is very soon Intel will be releasing the B570 graphics card for around $220, which may be worth the extra $30, but right now I have no way of knowing that, as at the time of recording this, that card hasn't released. The Intel Arc A750 has 8GB of video memory and is able to play pretty much any game at 1080p and even a lot of games at 1440p. The version I have here is the Acer Predator model, which combines a blower style cooler and an open pass-through cooler. It's kind of weird, and I probably would have went for a different model, but I had this one on hand, and at the end of the day, all A750s should perform about the same. To install this card, you need to pop out 2 of the back I/O covers, which I should have done before installing the motherboard. These take an insane amount of force to break free, but once loosened up can be bent back and forth until they snap off and can be lifted away. Then the PCIe lock can be opened, the card lined up, lowered down, and then pressed into place. After that, it's secured with a couple of screws and the power supply cables are plugged in. With that done, the last thing to do is just cable manage the system a little and put the side panels back on. For an operating system, I went with Windows 10 that I installed from a USB drive and which can be run for free, with the only downside being a watermark in the bottom right corner of your screen. After Windows was installed, I grabbed the chipset drivers from the AMD website and the graphics drivers from the Intel website, and once I knew everything was working okay, I went into the BIOS to enable two things. The first is the memory's XMP profile to make sure it's running at the full 3200 MHz, and the second, which is resizable bar up here, which ensures that we are getting the most performance out of our Intel graphics card, and with that, I was ready to start testing some games. I tried to test a variety from easy to run esports titles up to difficult AAA games, but if there's one you guys would like to see me test in the future, let me know in the comments below. So I started off with a new game I've never tested before, which is Marvel Rivals. I wasn't sure what settings to go with, so I just used what the game defaulted me to, which seems to be high settings at 1080p. Hopping into a game, I saw an average of 65 FPS and 1% lows of 39. This honestly was lower than what I thought it would be, as the game graphically and mechanically is pretty similar to Overwatch, which seems to be optimized much better. With that being said, this 65 FPS average felt very smooth and enjoyable, and gameplay wise, if you like Overwatch, you're probably gonna like this game. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077, which I tested at 1080p using the high preset along with the built-in benchmark. Doing this resulted in a 93 FPS average with 1% lows of 62. Also, as a way of testing ray tracing performance, I ran this same test at 1080p but using the medium ray tracing preset, which resulted in a 59 FPS average with 1% lows of 46. So overall, performance in Cyberpunk was very solid in my opinion. Moving on to Valorant, I tested at 1080p high settings and by hopping into a deathmatch. Doing this resulted in a 308 FPS average with 1% lows of 153, which is plenty of performance even for competitive play. In Elden Ring, I tested at 1080p using the maximum preset with no ray tracing. I just ran around an area attacking mobs and saw pretty much locked 60 FPS, the 1% lows were at 55, and overall this both looked and performed great in my opinion. Next is Minecraft, which I tested using the settings it defaulted me to, which are on screen right now. I tested by going into a new creative map, and while flying around with an Elytra and some rockets, I saw a 233 FPS average with 1% lows of 34. Now, flying around is definitely one of the more intensive things you can do in Minecraft, especially for the 1% lows, so I also tested by just running around on the ground, and doing so resulted in a 178 FPS average with 1% lows of 88. I know a lot of people play with shaders, so if there's a specific shader pack that's the most popular and you want to see me test, give me those suggestions in the comments. In Borderlands 3, I tested at 1080p ultra settings using the built-in benchmark, and doing so resulted in a solid 89 FPS average with 1% lows of 62. Then just for fun, I bumped it down to high and saw the average FPS go up to 104 and the 1% lows go to 70. Moving on to Fortnite, I tested this game at 1080p in performance mode with epic view distance and high textures. Hopping into a Team Rumbles match, I saw a 211 FPS average with 1% lows of 54, so the average was good, but the 1% lows still weren't great, even though I pre-downloaded the HD textures and played multiple games to try and render the shader cache before actually trying to get FPS numbers. Finally, I decided to test Black Myth Wukong, which is the hardest to run game I'm testing today, and use the free benchmarking tool. I went with the settings it suggested, which was 1080p high with 67% resolution scaling. This resulted in a 71 FPS average with 1% lows of 58. I also tested again at the same settings, but native resolution, and doing so resulted in a respectable 58 FPS average with 1% lows of 49. Overall, gaming performance on the system is very good in my opinion, especially for the $500 price point it's coming in at. In terms of temps while gaming, the GPU normally stayed in the range of upper 50s to mid 70s, and the CPU normally stayed in the range of mid 60s to upper 70s. The one exception was Borderlands 3, where I saw both the CPU and GPU go into the low 80s, which isn't ideal but is far from dangerous. With that being said, I do think one of the first upgrades someone building this should probably make is just buying and installing a 120mm intake fan at the front of the case to improve airflow and temps. The Q300L is generally thought of as pretty bad for airflow, but I think for just a single exhaust fan, temps were perfectly acceptable. All in all, for $500, I think this is a very solid build. Things you may want to consider are spending a little more on a case with better airflow and a tempered glass side panel, and also the B570 might be worth spending the extra $30 on, but again, at the time of recording this, I have no idea how that card will perform. There definitely were a number of ways I could have went with this build, so if you would have done something different, let me know what parts you would have went with in the comments below. So yeah guys, I think it's time to wrap this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.